You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 22nd of October 2024 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Hello, this is The Globalist, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. On the show ahead, the Brics summit kicks off in Russia today. More than 20 heads of state are being hosted by Vladimir Putin for the meeting of the bloc representing emerging economies. Then,
I have said many times publicly, and I'll say it again, in many, many ways, Donald Trump is an unserious man, but the consequences of him being president of the United States are brutally serious.
Mr. President, you actually have worked at McDonald's now.
Now I have worked at McDonald's. I've now worked for 15 minutes more than Kamala. Okay, she never worked here.
With just 2 weeks to go, we'll have an update from the US election campaign trail. We'll check in with Australia, where King Charles III was heckled in Parliament, and ask if the debate around the country becoming a republic is back on the table. We'll hear from a female lieutenant in the Ukrainian army on a brief break from the front line in the Donbass. We'll have a rustle through the papers and a hit of news from North Africa and the Middle East. And then,
hello, I'm Carlotta Rebello, Monocle's senior foreign correspondent, and this week I'm reporting from the World Economic Forum's Urban Transformation Summit in San Francisco, looking at some of the equitable, sustainable and resilient urban transformation happening in this city.
That's all ahead here on The Globalist, live from London. First, a look at what else is happening in the news. In Moldova, President Maya Sandu said yesterday her people had won a first battle in a difficult fight for their future, a day after a slim majority of 50.46% backed EU accession in a referendum that was clouded by allegations of Russia-backed meddling. Pakistan approved changes to the constitution on Monday, which included empowering Parliament to pick the Supreme Court's Chief Justice, drawing criticism from opposition parties who said it was an attempt to subvert the judiciary. And Peruvian former President Alejandro Toledo was convicted of taking bribes from Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht and sentenced to 20 years and 6 months in prison on Monday. Do stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on those stories. Now, the 16th annual Brics summit begins today in Kazan. It's hosted by Russian President Vladimir Putin. And I'm joined now by Mark Galeotti, who's a political analyst and the author of Putin's Wars from Chechnya to Ukraine. Mark, good morning to you. Many thanks for joining us. Can you just tell us what is Brics and why does it matter?
Well, Brics matters precisely because it is, in some ways, an alternative to, as its members would say, the kind of Western-dominated structures which up to now have shaped the world order. So it started as an alliance of Brazil, Russia, India and China, was then joined by South Africa, hence Brics. But now it's expanding with more members, including Iran, United Arab Emirates, and with countries like Vietnam and Turkey sort of potentially interested. And look, what it is depends on who you are. For Putin, it's an alternative to the Western world order. For most of its members, it's just a potentially useful political platform and economic trading bloc. But in many ways, it's exactly the question of how you define it, which is at the heart of this particular gathering in Kazan.
I'd like to bring in Steve Tsang now, who's the director of the China Institute at SOAS, University of London. Steve, as Mark was saying, the bloc has recently expanded. Are we likely to see it growing ever bigger?
I think it probably will. Xi Jinping is very keen to push for Brics to expand. I think he also wants to see Brics as an instrument for China to expand its influence in the global south, and with that to change the international order, and he calls it the democratization of international relationship.
So it really is, Mark, as you say, about about really refocusing how we see the world, and in terms of expanding it, the newly expanded group has a combined population of about 3.5 billion. That's 45% of the world's inhabitants. Their economies together are worth more than $28.5 trillion combined. That's equal to around, I understand, 28% of the world economy. Now, Saudi Arabia is, I think, still pretty much on the fence. Should it join, BRICS members would produce roughly 44% of the globe's crude oil. What would that mean for BRICS? And is Saudi Arabia likely to do that?
Honestly, I don't know about Saudi Arabia. I mean, having initially looked quite keen, it's now very much temporizing. And in part, that is in itself a kind of a case study, because it wants to join in order to be able to take advantage of another forum in which it can express its views, bring political influence to bear and so forth. But it doesn't want to sign up to some kind of anti-Western crusade. This is the thing. Most of the countries do not have quite the same messianic vision. I mean, yes, for example, at the moment there's talk about de-dollarizing. The idea is that the members should be able to find ways in which they can trade without using the dollar, because otherwise that makes them vulnerable to American influence. But de-dollarizing is just simply a way of not being susceptible to Western influence rather than becoming a bloc challenging the West. So I think this is the problem, and countries like Saudi are unlikely to join if they feel that that's kind of almost inevitably going to become a part of the sort of the mission of the bloc.
Steve, I wonder how united the bloc is. I mean, are some members at odds with each other, for instance, perhaps China and India?
Well, China and India certainly are not always seeing things eyes to eye. One basic problem is that both China and India have leaders who believe that their country should be the leader of BRICS. Now, BRICS start off as an organization without a particular leadership structure. It's a kind of coalition of the equals. So it is a bit rather more difficult, and that tension is just not going to away. And you saw at the Johannesburg meeting last year that India was less keen than China in seeing that expansion of BRICS.
And what's at stake, Mark, during this year's summit?
Well, look, for Putin, what's at stake, remember, he's the chair this time around because of the rotating process, it's very much a chance to project himself as not being isolated. It's very interesting that they very much have taken up use of the expression the world majority instead of the global south. And so he wants to be able to project both internationally and, very importantly, at home, this idea. And it's interesting that, for example, the widely read tabloid Komsomolskaya Pravda today started its main article about BRICS with Kazan will become the capital of the world for 3 days. So it's very much that sort of sense. So, he wants to project himself as being, crucially connected to, as you said, a huge tranche of the world. That's not necessarily what everyone else is interested in. I mean, China is very much clearly, it is there because it has an interest in not so say challenging, but bypassing kind of Western structures. Countries like India and South Africa, again, they are looking as a chance to project themselves as being sort of rising members of the kind of wannabe great power club. So I think the point is all the different countries come with their own agendas, and we should be aware that that is the case and not therefore not basically buy in to this propaganda we're getting from Moscow to the extent that it represents some kind of unified anti-Western alliance.
Because there are countries that straddle the two. I mean, Turkey, India, they're both with the West, but also inclined towards BRICS.
Yeah, exactly, because they see this just simply as one more in a whole range of international structures in which they can find ways of building new trade relationships and political relationships. They don't see it as some kind of either-or grand Manichaean decision.
So, Steve, Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestine states, has been invited. Is that significant? Well,
it is significant. I think from China's perspective, it's actually a good thing. You may recall that China had very, very strong relationship with both Palestine and Israel before the October 7th attack last year. But after the Gaza war started, China completely of the Palestinians is a positive step. It is something that would sort of project more of an appeal for BRICS to other countries in the global south. So from the Chinese perspective, that will build up that momentum for BRICS to expand and strengthen its appeal.
And Mark, I wonder if BRICS members can bring anything positive to the conflict in the Middle East, and if that will be under discussion at this session.
Well, it's hard to think, because at the moment, very much the line that Moscow is pushing, which actually, to be honest, is shared by many of the members, is essentially that Israel is the villain of the peace and that the West is contributing by supporting Israel. So they seem at the moment, frankly, more interested in finding blame and using that as a way of trying to kind of connect themselves to wider global southern communities rather than actually find some kind of resolution. So, again, I think it very much depends on what agendas the individual national leaders bring, because certainly from the point of view of the chair, it doesn't look like Putin is keen on, shall I say, resolving this dispute.
And Steve, I guess finally, I suppose I'd like to know if you feel that the world really is at a turning point. Are we seeing the dawn of a new world order where liberal democracy is shrinking? And if that's the case, what does it mean for BRICS?
I don't think we are at this stage seeing the dawn of a new international order. What we are seeing is that the old existing liberal international order is declining in terms of its appeal and in terms of its efficacy. And that is partly because of the challenges being posed by countries like China and Russia, but also partly because Western democracies have not been doing so well in the last decade or so. So the appeal is weakening, and the kind of combined approach of countries like China in terms of using development assistance to combine with the narrative of the need for democratization of international relations is actually having some appeal in the global south generally.
Steve, thank you very much indeed. That's Steve Tsang. Thanks also to Mark Galliotti. This is The Globalist. It's exactly 2 weeks before the US election, and both the Democratic candidate Kamala Harris and the Republican Donald Trump are hitting the campaign trail hard, but in very different ways. Joining us on the line from Los Angeles to bring us up to date in what's been called the most consequential election for the future of democracy is Sasha Eisenberg, Monocle's US politics correspondent. Sasha, is that the right way to describe this election?
I mean, we hear this every 4 years, and I think there are a lot of times we've heard it where it is clearly false. I think that there's a good reason to believe it. I mean, usually we're talking about, well, if so-and-so wins, it could be momentous in this way or that way. What we've learned with Donald Trump is that whether he wins or loses, we're probably in for something momentous. And so, frankly, it is hard to see how what happens in 2 weeks doesn't cause an eruption in some way, both in the United States and around the world. Because
he'll refuse to accept the result.
Yeah, we're either in for another 4 years of Trump, and we have, some sense of what that was like and some sense of what that would be, or, it is hard to envision a scenario where he accepts the result and moves on the way that candidates typically have, and the way he did not, obviously, 4 years ago, which means that, I think if Harris wins almost by any plausible margin, we are in for, a couple of months until the inauguration in January where we're on tenterhooks in the United States. Clearly, that's the way that people in the political world, in the media world, are sort of already at battle stations. That, and I think that just feels inevitable right now.
So what's the latest from the campaign trail? Harris is out there with Liz Cheney.
Yeah, Harris has made there are a few different directions that she could be pushing at this point. She could be speaking primarily to the parts of the traditional Democratic coalition that seem under-enthused, young voters, Black and Hispanic men, or she could be talking to an area where she sees opportunity to make bigger inroads into the Republican coalition, which are particularly with college-educated white Republicans, especially Republican women, and that's where she's focused her energy. Liz Cheney is a big part of this, but she campaigned with other former Republican office holders and Trump administration officials last week, and it seems to be that to the extent that there's a trade-off, Harris wants to be projecting a sort of message to the center right of the country that she's a safe place to be for people who probably are totally sold on the idea of not voting for Trump, but are trying to decide if they might go and vote for Senate and vote for Congress and leave the top of their ballot open in protest.
So Trump's style obviously differs significantly from Harris. I wonder how he's been comporting himself, because there are reports that he's really been behaving quite strangely. He may have some continence issues. Do we know what's going on with his health?
I can't speak to the continence, but there are good indications that Trump is even more sort of unfocused, and I'm loath to go around diagnosing these things, but the signs of sort of age have become more visible in the last few weeks. His speeches are even more rambling. The New York Times tried to address this in a semi-empirical way, where they compared his speeches to 2016, and they're more rambling, they're less focused, they're more angry, they're more bitter. There was a bizarre moment at the end of an event last week in Pennsylvania where he stood on stage for nearly 40 minutes listening to music and swaying. And so, I think a lot of people have gone broke trying to say that Trump has hit a new low. But we are seeing, just in the public presentation and performance, something that feels different than what we saw 4 years or 8 years ago.
Well, Pennsylvania, of course, very interesting, a key swing state, but also the place where Elon Musk appears to be trying to buy influence. Tell us more about his $1 million lottery.
Yeah, so Musk has been, starting this weekend, has been giving away $1 million, or saying at least that he's giving away $1 million a day until Election Day to somebody who signs a petition of his that is a registered voter and signs a petition committing themselves to First Amendment free expression and Second Amendment right to bear arms. There's some legal questions about this. And it's only one part of a pretty big financial investment that we're seeing from Musk, not just these $1 million handouts, but he's put many tens of millions of dollars into a super PAC that is trying to mobilize voters for Trump in some somewhat unproven, risky ways. And then he's doing something that's a little weird. He's going out and he's campaigning, on his own for Trump too, and making a bet that he is enough of a celebrity and a sort of persuasive force on his own, particularly in Pennsylvania, where he went to college for a few years.
Is this Musk positioning himself for a run at the presidency too, perhaps in 4 years?
My understanding is he's uneligible because he was born in South Africa. But I do think there's a question about what influence he could have in a Trump administration or other Republicans with whom he has relationships. Trump has said that he would turn to Musk for help building a government efficiency commission or something that would kind of recommend some anti-waste projects. And I think it's very difficult to imagine Musk actually taking a job in the administration, which would force him to divest of a lot of his holdings and have to disclose things about his finances that he wouldn't want to. But I think the idea that Elon Musk would be well positioned to have the ear of the president, have the ear of the White House chief of staff, cabinet officials, Trump will probably feel a significant sense of gratitude towards Musk, and I would expect that his shadow will be felt in another Trump term if we get there.
Sasha, what have the latest polls been saying? Are there any signs from early voting?
Early voting is sort of hard to read, and I think we probably make an error with too many inferences from it. Turnout has been pretty high in the places that have begun voting. It's always unclear whether the people voting early are folks who just would have voted on Election Day otherwise, and the term that a lot of political operatives here use is that you're just cannibalizing your Election Day vote by getting people to vote early, or whether that's evidence of new voters coming into the process or sort of disparate interests. One thing that we have seen that people should keep in mind as we see early vote numbers is that 4 years ago, Trump and the Republicans broadly told conspiratorial stories about early voting and mail ballots and discouraged their voters from being part of that process. And that has really changed this year. I think that they realized that was a weakness in their messaging in 2020 rather. And so there's an active push with the Republican National Committee and outside groups to encourage people to take advantage of early voting. And so my sense is, and the sort of early evidence suggests that a much larger share of early voters are Republicans who were talked out of doing that 4 years ago, but are now taking advantage of it.
Sasha, thank you very much indeed. That was Sasha Eisenberg joining us from Los Angeles. Now, still to come on the programme.
My drones is like my small babies or birds. I love them very much. I name them after book characters or after authors, my favorite one.
This is The Globalist.
UBS has over 900 investment analysts from over 100 different countries.
Over 900 of the sharpest minds and freshest thinkers in the world of finance today.
To find out how we could help you,
contact us at ubs.com.
It's 7:21 in London. I'm Georgina Godwin, and joining me in the studio is James Crabtree, who's a British author and a geopolitical analyst. Welcome to you, James.
Good morning.
A brand new voice on Monocle, so we're very, very pleased to have you here. James, earlier in the show, I was speaking to Steve Tsang and Mark Galliotti about Brics. As we know, it's on at the moment. It's being hosted by Vladimir Putin. But one of the things that Steve made a point of saying was that India and China are often at odds, and you can't say that Brics is a kind of an organisation which is completely unified. But there is good news for the relationship between India and China, as you found in the Hindustan Times.
That's right. So yesterday there was an announcement that India and China have reached a deal to resume border patrols in the Himalayas. So spool back 3 years, there was an incident in somewhere called the Galwan Valley. Nearly 20 soldiers on both sides were killed, and since then their relations have been dreadful. The big sticking point is, how do you go back to the situation before the violence happened? Who gets to go where? Who gets to patrol where? And after years of patient diplomacy, just in advance of the Brics summit, they did a deal last night. And so that means it may be possible, although we don't know yet, for Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping to actually have a sit-down at the Brics summit in Russia this week.
Absolutely. And I mean, we think that's probably going to happen. They're certainly both there, aren't they?
Yep, they're both there. I mean, as you say, the Brics is a difficult gathering in part because India and China have had terrible diplomatic relations for the last few years. But this may be a small ray of light, but one that will be worrying to America, Europe, Japan, the countries that would really rather prefer that India was not friendly with China and like to have India on their side.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's go to the Korean Peninsula, because the South has asked the North not to arm Russia and not to send troops there. Tell us more. This has been covered in a couple of outlets. Both the FT and The Guardian have stories on this.
Yeah, it's a big issue, this. Recently, the head of Ukrainian intelligence was asked who is Russia's most important military partner, and they said not China. It was North Korea, head and shoulders above everyone else. And so North Korea has been sending millions of weapons to help Russia, propping up its war effort. And this week it also said it was going to send actual troops, so troops on the ground, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 troops. So it's a major escalation, and it shows that, in a sense, the two big parts of the world, the Euro-Atlantic area, the Indo-Pacific, are increasingly intertwined. And so you now have the South Koreans, who have so far haven't sent any weapons to Ukraine. They've been a bit worried that if they did that, they would ruin their own relationship with Russia. They're very annoyed about this, and so they are lobbying to keep North Korea out of Ukraine.
They've called in the Russian ambassador and strongly urged Russia to immediately put out the North Korean soldiers. They're talking about satellite imaging, which shows just how big that presence is.
Yeah, I mean, from a South Korean point of view, the issue is what is North Korea getting in return? So, North Korea is a basket case state. It needs basic things like food, but part of the reason why it's helping Russia is it wants to get military technology, satellites, submarines, all things that would affect South Korea's security. So South Korea looks at this and thinks this is bad for Ukraine, obviously, but really it's bad for us.
Yeah. Just having a look at North Korea and where they've been involved before. I know certainly in my home country of Zimbabwe, they came in and trained our notorious 5th Brigade, who were then responsible for a huge massacre. But they've sent pilots to Egypt. They fought against Israel in the Yom Kippur War. They've sent people to Vietnam. I mean, this is all going back in history, but certainly there is a precedent for this, right?
Yes, and the ever-present concern about nuclear proliferation as well, as in North Korea is often pretty desperate in terms of what it needs, and what it has to offer is people, some sort of things like hacking techniques. They're very good at kind of at sort of cyber attacks, but also they're on the path to having nuclear weapons, and therefore there's a risk of nuclear proliferation. So there's all sorts of challenges that come from having North Korea playing a much more interventionist role in European security.
Let's go now to Canada, and this is the story about the assassinations of Indians on Canadian soil. Tell us more.
So this is a crazy story. A little while ago, both Canada and America accused India of, in Canada's case, assassinating, and in America's case, attempting to assassinate Sikh separatists. So Sikhs predominantly from the northwest of India. There is a small minority group who seek an independent Sikh homeland in India called Khalistan. This drives the Indians berserk. They see it as a very severe threat to national security. Whether it is or not is a kind of moot point. Anyway, so basically it appears that the Indian intelligence service, in a kind of Keystone Cops operation, coordinated with local criminal elements to assassinate this Sikh separatist and to try and do the same thing in the US, and that has caused a huge diplomatic firestorm. In particular, relations between Canada and India have hit a real low point where there's been expulsions of diplomats and all sorts of bad blood on both sides.
Just tell us more about exactly what happened in this press conference. There was quite an explosive press conference on Monday.
So there have been a series of sort of explosive press conferences where diplomats from both sides have traded barbs. So the Canadians have accused India of all sorts of breaking of international norms. India has been very defiant. You also have the actual sort of Sikh separatist groups themselves who have been defiant and said that they're going to continue their campaign for an independent Sikh homeland. So there doesn't seem to be much backing down. India has had a slightly different approach to the United States. It's been more, it's basically beaten up on Canada and been a little bit more sort of softly spoken with the US, and has arrested one of the figures in its own diplomatic service who was kind of associated with this botched operation.
Now, when I come in here in the morning, in the summer, it's lovely because the sun is shining, the birds are singing and all the rest of it. It gets to this time of the year and it's quite depressing, I have to say. It's all dark and quite often rainy. And now, of course, the clocks are going back next week, I think it is. But it seems, according to the Times, that there might be a cure to this, and it's very simple.
Yeah, this was a remarkable story. So this involves, if you picture in your head a kind of Apple Beats headset, or the kind of headset that I myself am currently wearing, a professor from the University of East London has conducted an experiment using something called transcranial direct current stimulation, TDCS, in which you sit on your couch, wear this headset, and you have very small pulses of electricity sort of piped into your brain. And this seems to have a quite impressive effect in terms of treating depression. It's quite different from, this might put you in mind of, old mental hospitals with electroconvulsive therapy, but the doses that you're given are very tiny. So instead of having electricity shot through your brain, it's like a little tickle. But somehow they have found that this seems to be a much better or much more effective than talking therapy or drugs.
And of course, it could save huge amounts of money if people had taken off antidepressants.
I suppose it could. The headsets themselves, they say here, cost £399. So that in itself isn't cheap. But yes, antidepressants also have side effects. And so if this, in terms of mood or weight gain, that kind of thing. So if this turns out to produce the same effect without any of the side effects, then I imagine it would be pretty popular and maybe even cheaper than one of those seasonal affective disorder lamps that people buy in order to get through a cold winter.
Absolutely, sign me up. James Crouchy, thank you very much indeed. Now, here's what else we're keeping an eye on today. In Moldova, President Maya Sandu said yesterday her people had won a first battle in a difficult fight for their future, a day after a slim majority of 50.46% backed EU accession in a referendum that was clouded by allegations of Russia-backed meddling. Pakistan has approved changes to the constitution on Monday, which included empowering Parliament to pick the Supreme Court's Chief Justice, drawing criticism from opposition parties who said it was an attempt to subvert the judiciary. Pakistan's top court has become a battleground between the government and jailed former Prime Minister Imran Khan, ruling on issues ranging from a controversial national election to a potential military court trial for Khan and his supporters. And Peruvian former President Alejandro Toledo was convicted of taking bribes from Brazilian construction giant Odebrecht and sentenced to 20 years and 6 months in prison on Monday. Toledo, a 78-year-old economist who holds a doctorate from Stanford University, governed the Andean nation between 2001 and 2006. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. That's the sound of the Australian Senator Lydia Thorpe heckling Britain's King Charles III after his speech at Parliament House in Canberra. The King and Queen Camilla are on a 6-day tour of Australia. And to tell us more about the visit and how the royal couple were received, I'm joined in the studio now by Latika Burke, a journalist and a writer-at-large for The Nightly in Australia. Latika, why is the King in Australia?
Well, he's en route to the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, which is in Samoa, a Pacific island. So it's very natural that he would make his first stop to Australia. In fact, if he hadn't stopped over in Australia, that in itself would be the story. So it's basically a matter of time. This is his first visit as the monarch. Of course, he spent a lot of time in Australia as Prince of Wales, but it's certainly also the first time that the King and Queen have been together. So it's a big event.
And I think he last addressed Parliament in Canberra for the 150th anniversary. So 50 years ago, this is the bicentennial. What did he say in his speech before he was heckled?
Well, I mean, he was actually paying tribute to Indigenous lands, and this is the great irony of all the people to target with this message. King Charles is probably one of the wokest royals you could imagine and would be deeply sympathetic to these issues. And he also does have a track record of having been quite outspoken on this issue. Indeed, I was in Kigali in Rwanda a couple of years ago for the last CHOGM, Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting, and he did say then, if any country in the Commonwealth that still has us as a head of state wants to be a republic, that's for you to decide, and let's do it without rancour, which was widely seen as, it's royal shorthand, Georgina, for you do you, but let's keep this classy. And that's not really what happened in Canberra this week.
Well, so give us the context to Lydia Thorpe's complaint.
Yeah. Look, this is actually a significant reflection of something deeper that's happening in Australia. Now, first thing to say, Lydia Thorpe was elected to the Parliament as a Green senator. She fell out with her own party, now sits as an independent, and opposed the Indigenous Voice referendum last year. So that gives you an insight into just how, I guess, far left her views are. Now, there were some very consistent reasons for her opposing the Voice, which we won't get into this morning. They're too complex. But it is, suffice to say, she has a very hardline view that is consistent with some parts of the Indigenous community. Now, she's an Indigenous woman, and she has made a big, I guess she's put her stake out as being a big campaigner for reparations, for wanting to part ties with the monarchy and wanting a treaty that would recognise the Indigenous rights to the land. Now, that's partly why she rejected a voice to Parliament last year. So that's the context for who she is, a very outspoken but very, very attention-grabbing person, and one of those politicians in Australia who's really come up with force because she's a plain speaker and she's very direct. And there's a class of politician in Australia, particularly women, that really do capture a national attention in this way. So when she made her outburst that we heard just then, this did not go down very well in Australia, Georgina. That's the most important thing to be said. And not just from people who are monarchists. So the right-wing opposition has this morning called for her to resign, saying if you really don't believe in the king and the system and the monarchy and the constitutional monarchy that Australia is, then why the hell are you in Parliament accepting $250,000 salary? Personally, I think that's going too far. I think she's entitled to be in the system and complain about it. But what's really significant is Indigenous elders have come out against her tactics and said she should not have done this, that this was self-indulgent, this was behaving like a spoiled child, and that this was embarrassing Australia on the world stage. And I think that's really the critical part here. Even people who do quietly want a republic in Australia, and it is very quiet, they will not like this tactic, and they will not like that somebody who's visiting the country was treated with any sort of disrespect or was being rude to. Because also, King Charles can't answer. And that's part of his job. He can't really have opinions on these things. Now, he, for his part, kind of was seen chuckling at this, and you know, he might have enjoyed the entertainment, because it certainly made what is otherwise a rather dull affair in these royal visits something that's quite sensational. But this has absolutely become a huge story, not just internationally, but of course it's dominated the headlines in Australia. It will be the water cooler story of this week.
And will we now see renewed calls for Australia to become a republic, do you think?
Well, interesting you say this. I've just written a piece for The Nightly, actually. The Republican cause in Australia has probably never been further behind than ever, which is quite strange because 30% now of Australians would say that their ancestry is English or Anglo. So we have an extremely diverse country. It's more Asian than it's ever looked. It is comprised of people who have little to no connection to England or the royal family or the Commonwealth. It also comes at a time where we're seeing worldwide, you know, anti-movements against colonialists and colonial legacies, such as things like the Commonwealth. So notionally, Georgina, republicanism should be at its strongest in Australia. It's actually waning. And it's stunts like Lydia Thorpe's that set it back and back and back.
Latika, thank you very much indeed. That's Latika Burke there. You're with Monocle Radio. Now it is 9:37 in Beirut and 8:37 in Zurich, and it's time to talk Middle East and North Africa news with the journalist Ruth Michelson. You're in Beirut today. So Ruth, tell us what's going on there in Lebanon, because we know that strikes hit close to a hospital overnight.
That's right. There was a strike very close to Beirut's Rafik Hariri Hospital that reportedly killed at least 4 people, including a child, wounded 32 people. This is coming up on the Al Jazeera Live blog. Looking at what's happening this morning, some rather competing information coming out via the various live blogs. If you pull up Al Jazeera, talking about Hezbollah's account of launching a barrage of rockets at the Israeli city of Haifa and positions in the Tel Aviv suburbs. They are pointing out that this is the first time we've used medium-range missiles used by Hezbollah. But also reporting things like an emergency, a state of emergency in Tel Aviv, which is not what we're seeing necessarily reported, for example, on Haaretz. They are reporting on a man being wounded by the falling parts of an interceptor missile from some of this rocket fire, but not necessarily quite the same picture being painted by both news outlets.
Let's have a look at what Joe Biden has been saying. He's deeply concerned about the release of classified documents about Israel's preparation for a potential attack on Iran.
Yeah, that's correct. I mean, AP reporting that Joe Biden, as you say, is deeply concerned, and then pointing out that the Biden administration is still not certain if this classified information was leaked or hacked. That's according to the national security spokesman, John Kirby, speaking last night. And AP also pointing out that there are analysts at the Site Intelligence Group who say the release of the documents came from a Telegram channel that was popular with Iran-backed militias.
But we still don't know exactly what Israel's planning, and that's part of the problem. The whole region is on a knife edge.
That's very true. I mean, some reporting in Arab news that the Iranian mission to the United Nations wrote to US President Joe Biden. They accused him yesterday of tacit approval and explicit support for what they said were Israel's unlawful military aggression against Iran. They're basing this on some of his comments during a visit to Germany, where he said that he currently has an understanding of how and when Israel will respond, but that, as you say, is something that is not known to most people and therefore is ratcheting up tensions.
And it's ratcheting it up on street level as well. It's not just political. I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit about the mood in Beirut.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's fair to say that, you know, the mood here is incredibly tense. There's been something of an expansion of the sites that Israel is targeting. We've seen that they've gone after branches of this de facto bank called Al-Qad al-Hassan, which is linked to Hezbollah. And that is a bank or a financial institution that has dozens of institutions across Lebanon. Now there was the strike on close to a hospital overnight. And so I think there's, you know, widespread concern about the widening scope of Israeli attacks here. And also, as you say, what this could mean if there is a more direct confrontation between Israel and Iran.
But for ordinary citizens there, is there fear? Is there panic?
Absolutely. I mean, I think what we see is a very different response based on how people are able to respond. Are they going up into the mountains around Beirut if they have the means to do so? Are they leaving the country if they have the means to do so? Lots of attention being paid to the national air carrier, Middle East Airlines, the fact that it is still running, still flying in and out of Beirut airport sometimes amidst airstrikes. And that, you know, this is something that Lebanese people take great pride in, that the national air carrier is still running and able to get them out. But whether somebody is able to leave the country is very much a question of their own means at this point in time.
And how much support then would Hezbollah have from the people of Lebanon?
I mean, this is a deeply divided country in this way. And I think what you see is a split very often in people saying, you know, I don't necessarily support Hezbollah as a group, but that people will say, well, there are only means for being able to defend against Israeli attacks, whatever they think of them politically. And you do find people that say that they are deeply opposed to Hezbollah having power in Lebanon, but that they also are looking for an end to Israeli attacks. Lots of attention, for example, being paid to the visit by Amos Hochstein, the US envoy, yesterday, with this discussion around, you know, him saying that the Biden administration wants an end to this as soon as possible, and then saying that the UN Resolution 1701, the words on everybody's lips here, which is the resolution that ended the 2006 war, that he was saying that implementing this once again would not be enough, and lots of questions being asked about, well, what does that really mean for the future if the US and a little bit of US pressure, even at this time, can't enforce a ceasefire here?
Absolutely. Ruth, there's a lovely story about an Egyptian dog.
Yes, just what everybody wants in these dark times is a cute animal story, speaking purely for myself here. And so this is an Egyptian dog that was spotted by some American paragliders that had climbed to the top of the Khufu pyramid, which is almost 150 meters high. One of the US paragliders telling CNN Travel one person thought it was a mountain lion, which really makes me question their eyesight. The National reporting that the cream dog with brown spots has been named Boca by Egyptian social media users who were comparing it to the ancient Egyptian god Anubis. And saying that it's found fame in Egypt. Reports of wealthy Americans offering to buy Boca for $100,000, and people commenting that they are hoping and praying that the wonderful dog never leaves Egypt, because in the words of one particularly well-known Egyptian TV host, he has made publicity for Egyptian monuments that's bigger than anything we could have planned.
I mean, what's extraordinary, though, is that street dogs are so common in Cairo. There's a lot of strays.
There are a lot of strays. They're not often treated very well. Neither are people, by the way, who climb the ancient pyramids. There have been people that have been fined for that in the past. It's now apparently punishable by either a month in jail or about the equivalent of a $4,000 fine. So it's kind of interesting that even in this moment where, it's punishable, there have been people that have been fined this way and punished in the past for doing exactly this. But a street dog that has climbed to the top of it and, just done a kind of natural and kind of beautiful thing, chasing some birds around and attracting some paragliders, has been absolutely hailed by all of these pro-government commentators in Egypt as bringing wonderful publicity, encouraging people to visit Egypt, but to do something that they would be explicitly banned from doing.
Absolutely, Ruth. Thank you very much indeed. That's Ruth Michelson there. And this is The Globalist on Monocle Radio.
UBS is a global financial services firm with over 150 years of heritage. Built on the unique dedication of our people, we bring fresh thinking and perspective to our work. We know that it takes a marriage of intelligence and heart to create lasting value for our clients. It's about having the right ideas, of course, but also about having one of the most accomplished systems and an unrivaled network of global experts. That's why at UBS, we pride ourselves on thinking smarter to make a real difference. Tune in to The Bulletin with UBS every week for the latest insights and opinions from UBS all around the world.
Lieutenant Yulia Misytenko joined the Ukrainian army in 2016 along with her husband. She briefly left after he was killed in a Russian bombardment, but re-enlisted on the first day of the full-scale Russian invasion on the 24th of February 2022. She commands a 25-man drone unit on the front line in the Donbass. She's collaborated with the author Lara Marlowe to produce the book How Good It Is I Have No Fear of Dying, which paints a searing portrait of life on the front line and offers insight into Ukraine's past and possible future. It's a compelling story of a country at war and a fearless woman fighting for its survival. Lieutenant Yulia joined me earlier to discuss this.
My job is to observing the whole front line with drones, also with UAVs. With drones we're observing up to maybe 8 or 10 kilometers. And with UAVs, we are observing 20 plus kilometers of the front line, in depth. And also I have a group of first personal view drones. It's for attacking when Russians are trying to attack our positions. We're using them as a kamikaze drones. And also I have a group of soldiers who are using a big heavy agricultural drones. It can weigh up to 15 kilos, and we can drop bombs on Russian positions with them. But for now, we are dropping supplements to our infantry, water, food, and whatever they need.
Now, I know that you command a platoon of 25 men. Are you the only woman in the group?
Actually, a few months ago, I mobilized one of the women She now serving in my platoon as a drone pilot.
I know you're a great lover of literature. You name your drones.
Yeah. My drones is like my small babies or birds. I love them very much. I name them after book characters or after authors, my favorite one. Or it might be just like funny names like Brett or whatever.
But Jane Austen, you've got one called?
Yeah, I've got one called Jane Austen, because it's my favorite British author.
You did a huge amount for advancing gender equality within the army. Was that a very difficult fight? I mean, even just to get uniforms made to fit women.
I have a great Sisters in Arms. They actually founded Women Veterans Movement. They founded it in almost 2016, I suppose, or maybe it was quite a long period of time ago. And actually, at first, they did a huge job, and then somehow they found me. I even can't remember the precise days because it was like such a natural that I just started to chat with them, and we started to advocate the law, which allows women to take combat positions, and it was like a big deal because we faced with a resistance on each step while we were advocating this law. But it took us 2 years to brought it to implement it in our legislative system. Yeah. And I think it's also it was compared to another NATO countries, it was quite fast actually.
And just finally, before we go, you're over in the UK at the moment. You're on a book tour, but after this, you're straight back onto the front line in the Donbass.
Yes.
How do you feel about that?
I feel like returning home, maybe, because Donetsk region and my unit is like a family for me for now. And Donetsk region, despite the fact that it was sometimes that I didn't like it at all, but for now I really enjoy being there. Despite that it's quite extremely, not because of war, but it's actually quite extremely region, because it's very industrial with a great amount of mines. It's very brutal, I would say, but I love it.
And your book is called How Good It Is, I Have No Fear of Dying. Is that how you feel?
Yes, I don't fear to die.
How Good It Is, I Have No Fear of Dying by Lieutenant Yulia Mistetenko and Lara Marlowe is out now. And listen out for a special episode of Meet the Writers where I have a much longer chat with them both. You're listening to The Globalist on Monocle Radio. The fourth annual Urban Transformation Summit is currently taking place in San Francisco, and our senior foreign correspondent Carlotta Rebello is there and joins me now to tell us all about it. Carlotta, of course, San Francisco is a place that's really undergone huge urban transformations. I mean, I remember it being this beautiful city full of hills, and then it goes through into this kind of horrible place with huge amounts of homelessness and crime and so on.
Absolutely, and San Francisco has been really trying to change some of these challenges that the city has. And of course, since the pandemic, the recovery of cities, particularly in the United States, has been a topic that we've talked about a lot on Monocle Radio, and that we've been looking particularly at the depopulation of the downtown center. And this is not just by residents, but also since the return to the office has been such a challenge. So it's interesting to be here in San Francisco and hearing all about the ways that they're trying to tackle some of these issues. This event is all about bringing together the public and private sector to try to offer some of these solutions, but also explore some of the initiatives that are happening in the city.
So why San Francisco?
Well, exactly because of this. This is a city that's been trying to leverage itself as a living lab. A lot of companies have relocated to the city over the past couple of years, really to try to bring some dynamism back to it. Of course, we know all about the tech hub nearby in Palo Alto and whatnot, but the center of San Francisco has really been ready for some challenge, for some change, and for some opportunity. Last night here in San Francisco, we had the opening ceremony where the mayor, London Breed, was speaking at and talking precisely about, how this is a moment for the city to embrace all this renewal that's happening, all the investment coming in as well. And there's a few interesting redevelopment projects too. We were at the Salesforce Tower near the Fisherman's Wharf, which has been redeveloped, and it was just a matter of looking around to see the amount of new buildings and quite a good mix of both office and residential. And it's just so nice to see a city where things are happening.
And what are some of the key themes on the agenda?
Yeah, so as explained, this is an event that really wants to bring people from both sectors, from both private and public. And one of the key topics throughout the 3 days of the event is this one of accelerating urban innovation and also how to drive climate action in cities. While they are separate, they also go very much hand in hand, making sure that every single new bit of investment and of innovation coming into our cities also has sustainability and resilience in mind. But a topic that I'm particularly interested in, that's going to be at center stage tomorrow, it's this about shaping the future of travel and tourism. Now, we've talked a lot about the challenges that cities are facing regarding tourism. We saw this summer anti-tourism protests happening across Europe particularly. So it will be interesting to hear from the tourism and travel representatives about the ways you can actually tackle this, because, cities need tourism. For a lot of them, it is the main revenue, the main GDP. So sustainable tourism is possible. So how do we go about doing that without harming the residents, without impacting housing prices, without alienating those who call those cities their home? So I think that's quite a topical discussion that will be quite interesting to figure out not only what these people, these representatives want from tourists, but how cities can do better too.
And where are you headed off to today?
Yes, so as part of the event, we get out of the conference room and do a few of the tours. And the one that I'm doing is all focused on waterfront resilience. Now, we are going to have a tour of San Francisco's waterfront. Before you get jealous, Georgina, it's on foot and not in the actual water. So I'll be touring some of these new developments, but particularly under this prism of how waterfront redevelopment provides another layer of safety. As we have, increased challenges with climate, we see how climate change is impacting cities around the world, and how water particularly can be the rising sea levels, and the force of the water can be really damaging. So how can we build cities that are prepared for this, but also take in mind, the ecological vitality of the natural habitat around them, and as being by creating new parks and new open space, but also public realms, so that the public can enjoy the shoreline. So that climate mitigation initiatives don't always have to be, just straight to the point. Development can be done in a way that actually leaves the city better than what was there before.
Carlotta, thank you very much indeed. That was Carlotta Rabella in San Francisco. And that's all for today's programme. Thanks to our producers, Anita Riotta, Chris Chermak and Hassan Anderson. Our researcher, Sana Jamani, and our studio manager, Elliot Greenfield, with editing assistance from Steph Chungu. After the headlines, there's more music on the way, and the briefing is live at midday in London. The Globalist will return at the same time tomorrow. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thank you for listening.